October 3rd, 1849. Baltimore. It's raining. A man named Joseph Walker is walking to a polling station. Election night, cold, wet, dark. And there, in the gutter, he finds a body. Not dead, but barely alive. Delirious. Eyes unfocused. Mumbling something nobody can understand. Wearing clothes that aren't his own. Walker gets closer and stops breathing for a second. Because the man lying in the gutter is the most famous writer in America. Edgar Allan Poe. Nobody knows how he got there. Nobody knows where he's been for the last 5 days. He's taken to Washington College Hospital. For 4 days he drifts, in and out of consciousness, hallucinating, trembling, calling out a name repeatedly. Reynolds. Nobody knows who Reynolds is. Nobody knows what he saw in those final hours. On October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe takes his last breath, age 40. Cause of death, unknown. His funeral lasts 3 minutes. 3 minutes. In the cold rain. Almost nobody comes. The greatest writer America ever produced dies alone in a hospital bed, wearing a stranger's clothes, calling out a name that means nothing to anyone. And 175 years later, we still don't know what happened to him. But to understand the death, you have to understand the life. And the life was darker than anything he ever wrote. He came into this world already losing. Boston. 1809. His father, David Poe, was an actor, an alcoholic. He didn't wait to see what his son would become. He left when Edgar was 1 year old. Just walked out. No goodbye, no explanation, just gone. His mother, Eliza, was also an actress.
Talented.
Beautiful. Talented. Loved by audiences. And dying slowly from tuberculosis. She kept performing even when she was sick, because she had 3 children to feed and no husband to help her. Edgar was 2 years old when he watched his mother take her last breath. 2 years old. He didn't understand what death was yet. But he felt it, that cold, empty feeling of someone there, and then suddenly, not there anymore. He would spend the rest of his life trying to describe that feeling, and never quite escaping it. After Eliza died, the children were separated, sent to different families like unwanted furniture. Edgar went to John Allen, a wealthy merchant in Richmond, Virginia. Not adopted, just taken in. There is a difference. Adopted means you belong to someone. Taken in means you are tolerated. John Allen made sure Edgar always felt that difference. When Edgar did well, Allen took the credit. When Edgar struggled, Allen withdrew. Money, affection, approval. All of it conditional. All of it temporary. And deep inside that little boy, something was being written. A story about darkness, about loss, about the terror of loving something and watching it disappear. Edgar grew up brilliant. Languages, mathematics, poetry. His mind absorbed everything it touched. At 17, he fell in love for the first time. A girl named Elmira Royster. She was everything. He got engaged. Then went to the University of Virginia, full of hope, full of plans. And then John Allen stopped sending money. No tuition, no rent, no food, just silence. Edgar started gambling just to survive. Lost everything. Debt piled up like a slow flood. He had to drop out. Came back to Richmond, broken, and found out Elmira's father had been intercepting all his letters, destroying them before she could read them. She thought Edgar had abandoned her. She had moved on, engaged to someone else. Everything he loved, gone. In one single moment, he went to Boston with nothing. No money, no family, no future. And in that emptiness, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He wrote. Published his first book of poems at 18. Out of his own pocket. It sold almost nothing. But he didn't care. He knew what he was. Even if nobody else did yet. Desperation pushed him into the army. He enlisted under a fake name, Edgar A. Perry, because he was too ashamed to use his real one. He was a good soldier, got promoted fast. But the uniform wasn't who he was. He pulled strings, got discharged, got into West Point, one of the most prestigious military academies in America. John Allan had briefly agreed to support him again. But then Allan remarried. New wife, new family, new priorities. Edgar was no longer part of the picture. Support cut off, again. So Edgar did something calculated. He deliberately got himself expelled, missed drills, ignored orders, left on purpose, because he had finally understood something about John Allan. No matter what Edgar achieved, it would never be enough. So he stopped trying to earn approval and started building something that couldn't be taken away. His writing. He moved to Baltimore. Penniless. Moved in with his aunt, Maria Clem, and her young daughter, a little girl named Virginia. In Baltimore, everything changed. The darkness that had been chasing Edgar his whole life, he stopped running from it. He turned around, picked it up, and built a world out of it. The Telltale Heart. A man driven mad by guilt. The fall of the House of Usher. A family destroyed by its own secrets. The murders in the Rue Morgue, the world's very first detective story. Think about that for a second. Before Poe, detective fiction did not exist. Sherlock Holmes Poe. Hercule Poirot Poe. Every crime thriller you've ever read traces back to one broke man in Baltimore. Writing by candlelight, eating almost nothing. Arthur Conan Doyle said it himself. Without Poe, there is no Holmes. Stephen King, Alfred Hitchcock. Both said Poe was their foundation. He didn't just write stories, he built entire genres from nothing. And he was doing it all, while barely surviving. Editors paid him almost nothing. Publishers took his work and gave him pennies. He was making other people rich, while he counted every cent just to eat. But something else was happening too. Something quieter. Something that would eventually destroy him completely. He was falling in love. With Virginia. His cousin. She was 13. He was 27. By today's standards, wrong. Deeply wrong. But in 1836, cousin marriages were legal. Common even. Age of marriage was completely different. This was not unusual for that era. What was unusual was the depth of what Edgar felt for her. Virginia wasn't just his wife. She was the first person in his entire life who stayed, who didn't leave, who didn't disappear. For a man who had lost his father before he could remember him, lost his mother at age 2, lost his first love to someone else's interference, Virginia was everything. His anchor, his home, his reason. And for a few years, things were almost okay. He was writing, editing magazines, getting recognition. The Raven, published in 1845, made him famous overnight. Overnight. People were reciting it on the streets of New York. His name was everywhere. And he still couldn't pay his rent. Fame without money. Recognition without security. The world loved what he created and refused to pay him what it was worth. And then Virginia started coughing. That sound. That specific sound. He had heard it before. His mother made that sound. Tuberculosis. The same disease. The same slow ending. He watched Virginia deteriorate for years. Good days and terrible days. Moments of hope followed by crashes so dark he couldn't function. He started drinking more. The alcohol wasn't enjoyment, it was medication. The only thing that quieted the voice in his head. The voice that kept saying, "Everyone you love leaves. Everyone you love dies. You are cursed." Virginia died in January 1847. And when she took her last breath, something fundamental in Edgar shattered. Not broke, shattered. Like glass that can never be put back together the same way. He wrote Annabel Lee after her death, about a love so pure that even death couldn't touch it. He meant every word, and every word cost him something. But grief wasn't his only enemy. There was a man named Rufus Griswold, a rival editor, bitter, jealous, calculating. He hated everything about Poe, hated that Poe was more talented, hated that Poe knew it. And in what can only be described as the worst decision of his life, Poe made Griswold the executor of his literary estate, the man who would control his legacy after death. Maybe Edgar thought it was a peace offering. Maybe he wasn't thinking clearly. Whatever the reason, Griswold was now holding the knife, and the moment Poe died, he used it. Griswold published a fake obituary the very next day, claimed Poe was a drunk, a drug addict, a madman, made up quotes, invented stories, fabricated scandals. And because he controlled the estate, he controlled everything published about Poe for years. For decades after his death, the world thought of Edgar Allan Poe as a cautionary tale. Not a genius, not the man who built modern literature, just a drunken lunatic who wasted his talent. One jealous man rewrote the story of the greatest American writer who ever lived. By 1849, Edgar was trying to climb back. He had reconnected with Elmira Royster, his first love. She was a widow now. They were going to get married. He was planning a new magazine, new projects. He had even joined a temperance society, actively trying to stop drinking. For the first time in years, there was something that looked like hope. On September 27th, he left Richmond heading to New York. That was the last time anyone who knew him saw him standing upright. 5 days later, Joseph Walker found him in that gutter. What happened in those 5 days? Nobody knows. His own doctor said he wasn't drunk. No smell of alcohol. No signs of a binge. Then what? Some say rabies. His symptoms match almost perfectly. Delirium. Fear of water. Hallucinations. Some say a brain tumor. When his grave was opened years later, an unidentified mass was found inside his skull. Some say cooping, that he was kidnapped off the street by an election gang, drugged, forced to vote multiple times under different names, then dumped. He was found on election day, at a polling station, wearing clothes that weren't his, disoriented beyond explanation. Some say he was simply beaten by someone who had a reason to want him silent. 26 theories, 175 years, and still no answer. He was buried first in an unmarked grave, no headstone, no name. The man who invented horror fiction dumped in the ground like he never existed. It took Baltimore school children collecting pennies to eventually build him a proper monument. Pennies, that's what the world decided he was worth, while he was alive. But here is what the world missed, while it was busy ignoring him. Every time you read a mystery novel, that's Poe. Every horror film that makes you check under your bed, that's Poe. Every detective story ever written, that's Poe. He built those rooms. He laid every brick. And then he died in a gutter, wearing a stranger's clothes, calling out a name nobody recognized, with not a single person who loved him by his side. The man who spent his entire life writing about darkness died inside it. The man who invented the mystery story became the greatest unsolved mystery of his time. Maybe that was always how it was going to end. Maybe the universe was just completing the story he started. Dark, unresolved, and impossible to forget. Nevermore.